Welcome back, everybody. In this episode, we are going to talk about the importance of training with your neighboring agencies. We're going to give a couple examples of that. This is the Shots Fired podcast. I've brought Patrick Cox, my old partner, really good friend who I worked with for a long time, in studio today to talk about this. He was a full-time SWAT team member, and he's actually, well, I'd like to say, directionally, navigationally challenged. Patrick, welcome. Thanks for coming in. You've been in on the show before. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Mark.
Before we get started, we want to thank Near, the sponsor of today's video. Near manufactures and sells premium audio equipment. Near is best known for its 360 in-ear pieces, boosting 0% ear fatigue, in-ear micro technology, 100% situational awareness, crystal clear communication, and ultimately unmatched comfort. Kyle's been out sick for a long time. I actually blame it on his diet because most of the things that he eats is hot wings and mashed potatoes and chili cheese sauce from KFC. So he's probably sick from that. All right. So thanks for being here. I got to share this story about your navigational challenges. So Patrick and I rode together quite a bit working patrol. And there was one incident where
One incident.
More than one, multiple, but this is, it's hard to pick a story, but this one stands out where we had made an arrest in North Sac, and you were driving. We were going to transport the person to jail. So we're going westbound 80, southbound I-5. And then typically you would take J Street exit and go to the jail. But we never took J Street exit, and we continued driving. And then we actually went westbound 50, and we started going into another city. And I remember driving up over the bridge and looking over and going, wow, this is a beautiful view. It's nighttime, all the city lights. And I told Patrick, I was like, Patrick, have you seen this view? I haven't seen this view in the dark in our patrol car before because we're in another city, but it's beautiful. Do you remember that?
I don't remember quite like that. I do remember the guy in the back. He kind of looked around too, and he's got a little nervous. And he's like, where are you taking me? Where are you taking me?
He was panicked. He was definitely scared because he was very quiet. And there's times when we've arrested people where they joke around and you can have an enjoyable time with them. Like it's a job, they recognize it, and you can at least enjoy the drive and make it as enjoyable for them as possible. And then there's other people that are absolutely silent and they don't want to say anything. And this was that one until he looked out the window and realized he was nowhere near Sacramento.
I missed an exit. That's pretty much sums up the story. I missed an exit. I had to make a turnaround.
You missed more than the exit. Okay. All right. Well, let's get into this. So we're going to talk about, both of us were on a full-time SWAT team, and why it is so critical to train with your neighboring agencies. There's times when you may have a joint call for service or a SWAT operation, and we'll start with SWAT, and then we'll work ultimately to the importance of patrol assets doing this as well. So let's talk about SWAT regional training. When we first started on the team, there was a regional training day. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was, I believe FBI would host it. They'd invite neighboring agencies that had SWAT teams. And I think it was probably 20, 25 different teams would show up, run different scenarios. You'd be graded by different teams, whether it's like a vehicle assault or, they had like a breaching station or, just entry from different points.
Yeah, I remember they did like raid training, like officer rescues, bus assaults. They had all kinds of different scenarios. But some of those, I think the benefit of when we first started on the team, we had never trained with other agencies. And then this regional training was a real eye-opener and why it was so important. Because you're right, they did do scenarios, and different teams, and our team even ran a scenario. And you'd have all the SWAT teams would actually go through the scenarios, and whoever the proctor was basically used what they thought was their best tactic and would grade you in a way or evaluate your team's response to that scenario and then do a debrief. And I think those were really good discussions.
And they were, and I think being graded by somebody that you possibly have never met, that you don't work with, they might have a little more honest opinion with you than somebody, oftentimes we'd run training, but we're being graded by someone on our team who's familiar with us. They kind of know, your strengths and weaknesses, but opposed to just having that, bird's eye view of it and saying, hey, look, this is how we set the scenario up. This is how we wanted it to run. And this is what we were able to notice and we took note of when you guys went through it.
Yeah. I don't remember. I don't know if you did or not. I don't remember, but I never actually participated in any of those scenarios. Only certain guys on the team did that, but we were lucky enough to walk around, or at least I remember was to walk around and watch all these different scenarios. And a couple of times I got to watch multiple teams, and one specifically stands out was a bus assault. And there's different theories of approaching from the front or from the back of the bus. This one was very interesting. They came from the side, threw up ladders, broke windows, threw flashbangs in everywhere, and then made entry, which it was just an interesting tactic. That's one that really stood out to me, and there's a lot of discussion about, is that good or is that not the best approach?
Yeah, and I think in doing the training with neighboring agencies too, because on some of these calls that you'd get, they would last, for an extended time period where you've got to rotate out. You got to rotate your team out. Even though we're a full-time team, at some point we have to have relief. And being able to hand that off to somebody, especially if it's within your city, and then they're relieving you, that you want to be able to hand it over to somebody who you trust to handle it in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's the benefit of those regional training days is, I think initially when it started, you would go around and you would talk to a bunch of different teammates, get to know them, and we knew which was our immediate surrounding agencies, and those were the departments that we really focused our attention on versus the ones that were further out, because it was unlikely for us to go much further than a neighboring agency. Generally, there's somebody else that would do it. But what I found interesting is really being able to see all the different gear people had, like what they carried on them, what they brought with them, the type of kits that they had, their helmet setups, like their belt setups. That was always interesting because one stood out to me of, he had his radio on his back. And I think I pointed out to you, it was like, how does he even control the radio? And there's no way to manipulate a radio with it on your back the way it was set up.
Well, and I think on something like that I believe he was from a very small agency where in talking to him, they only ran like 2 channels. So
yeah, okay.
He wasn't going to have any need to change channels, where sometimes we'd be on a call. It would start on, if it was in the north area, we're going to run it on that station till that became dedicated. And then they would switch everybody over to a second station or a second channel. Sorry.
Yeah. And then one of the benefits of that regional training day was like getting the opportunity to see everybody else's armored vehicle. Because I remember there was one agency, it was smaller but very busy next to us, that had an AMRAP. And I remember the guys on our team looking at it and being like, that's not feasible whatsoever for the city that we're in because of the height of that thing. You had so much exposure under it where you couldn't actually use it for armor. But then later on, after talking with other people, we realized like that would be a really good rescue vehicle because you could take that almost anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, with the regional training, the one thing that, because I didn't get on the team until probably having 7 years on or about that, you kind of, you were class or 2 ahead of me, but you start going to you start going
navigation and math is another thing that I didn't want to bring up the math.
I wasn't sure where you actually fell in that. But getting connected to people that you may have gone to the academy with, now they're on a neighboring SWAT team.
Yeah.
And kind of, hey, I didn't know you're here. Let's, get together. Let's talk about this. Or now you have that point of contact. If something comes up, you're like, oh no, I know a guy over on that team right now. And then, you'd have to reach out, talk to him. Hey, how are you guys doing this? What are you guys using? Put together a training day with them or something like that.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the regional training days. There's a lot to learn from that. And then there's a lot to pass off because there's different agencies that would only have 3 or 4 operations an entire year. And internally in our department, it brought up a lot of discussions of, well, is there even a need to have a team if you're only responding to 1 or 2 or 3 incidents a year? Why not form a regional team? Where this was a regional training day where all those teams came together, but forming a regional team.
Yeah, or if you don't have that, that much work, passing that off to a large, like if it's a it's the city team and they only have a few guys who are interested in it, is that, say, hey, look, this is maybe something we're not going to have a team. We're going to pass that kind of work off to the county.
Yeah. It's hard to, I imagine it'd be hard to do that, but sometimes that's the best decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's like anything else. If you're not getting the reps in it, if you're not doing it all the time, you're probably not at the best that you could be.
Right. And there's probably a neighboring team that is getting more practice, more reps, that is probably going to do it safer.
Yeah.
And I also think with the regional training days, I think you mentioned that it might not even happen anymore. And it might not even be feasible in different parts of the country and more rural areas. Having a regional training day is probably not practical. So we were talking like different opportunities and ideas would be for your team leader or even a couple guys that are on the team to go and watch other teams training and just get ideas and take notes and bring it back.
I know that happened with us. I knew there was other agencies that would come where they'd send over, we'd have a training day or whatever out at, the shoot house or something where we're running different tactics, but they would have, the whole team couldn't come over because sometimes, you got guys on graveyard, swings, days, guys who aren't detectives, but the team leaders would come over and they'd watch and kind of get, input there and kind of take that back to their team. But we were fortunate enough that we did get to train with several of the neighbor agencies. One of them, we trained with SSD quite a bit. We rely on them for, coverage when, if we were out of town, we'd cover them if they were in town, or if we were going to be tied up on something else, like, was it the CIM marathon? I know that they would cover for us. But you kind of have that relationship with them. And there was more than a handful of incidents where we ended up actually working together. But it made that relationship that much easier because you have the constant communication with them. You see these guys all the time. You know them by name, where you're not thrown into the mix on some scene where now the introductions and everything else is for the first time. And meanwhile, you have an active situation going on.
Yeah, and we did know a lot of those guys, and you're right. SSD was a really, really good team. In working with them, I mean, that we were very beneficial to work often with them or send guys over there to watch what they were doing and vice versa. Because when incidents would happen and we had to relieve them, because I think for us, it was like a 12-hour time period. If once you hit the 12-hour mark, then another team has to take over, something like that. But knowing that they're going to come in, the other team has confidence in our team that our setup is good, the positioning, the Bearcat, where HRT team is, the snipers are set up, reactive authority, like the tools are there. Having that confidence, knowing that they're coming in, feeling comfortable with what we have, and vice versa, where if we relieve them, we were comfortable with that setup versus maybe a team that you might be trying to relieve and showing up and going, oh my gosh, we're going to have to really adjust this whole entire setup because this doesn't work.
Yeah, and we had seen situations like that too, where we had gone over and assisted other teams, but or we're working under their command because it's in their city, but necessarily we're following their command, but it wouldn't necessarily follow underneath our SOPs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I completely forgot all about that. You're right, because if it's in our city, it's our management, our policies. We fully understand everything that's happening, the reactive authority. We know the people, they're confident, their abilities to make decisions. But then you're right, when you go into another city, that management is running that scene. You're just relieving the SWAT team, and then their policy. We still have our own policies that we have to abide by, but they also have a different process or procedure or workflow. And that, you're right. And that is important maybe for the team leaders to actually have that interaction.
Yeah. And to kind of know that before going into a situation like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this extends even beyond SWAT teams. I think it even goes to really benefit patrol. And I never had the opportunity to do it. I don't know if you did, but if I did or even knew about it, I would do it. Because if your city or county lines up, or it's going to match another city or another county, it's possible you're going to go into that jurisdiction. So knowing those officers that work patrol in that area during your shift is huge, because it's possible they're going to come and help you or vice versa.
Well, when we used to ride together in Del Paso Heights, when we were on swings together. I think it was Grant. Was it Twin Rivers or Grant PD at the time?
Yeah, it was Twin Rivers. Then it switched over to Grant Police Department. Yeah,
a lot of times we'd make a car stop or something, and one of those guys would show up because they're patrolling the area, not going too far, but they hear, they're on the same radio frequency. They're going to show up, and you got familiar with them, got comfortable with them, but it was just that,
yeah. Well,
after doing it for a while,
that even happened because, and you're right. This was in our area that we worked. It was a small school district police department, and they would make traffic stops. They weren't really supposed to make them outside of the schoolish area, but there was times when they had to follow cars something, and they would do it, and then we'd show up and assist. And if you didn't know them, you were always pulling up like, well, I'm not really sure how to handle this or what they're going to do. You look at them for a little bit of help or direction, or you're thinking, I don't really like how this is going. Yeah,
and I think it's that, when you're there were certain guys where you'd be around him enough where you're like, okay, I'm gonna approach the vehicle and assist him, or hey, I'm gonna stay back, let him handle this call. If something happens, we'll engage. We'll be there for backup, but kind of keep that distance and let him run his car stop the way he normally does, not interfere with him. But after you start doing that over and over and over again, okay, I'll approach his car, make contact with him, not wait till the call or his interaction with him is over. He knows we're back here if we're needed. If so, he'll call us up.
But yeah, I think that is really important to have that communication with your neighboring officers or deputies. So when you arrive on scene, like, what they expect and what to do. Depending on where you're at, it might not be feasible, but if you're in an area where you can do that, I think it's really beneficial.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is, we were talking before we started, just recognizing, you go to the trainings and you recognize certain tactics. And the one we had that pursuit, it lasted quite a ways, ended up in Davis. Car ends up.
Well, let's just talk about that, because that is a really good example of doing surveillance on a car, and then it goes pursuit, and then a crash, highway patrol shows up, different agency. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can. It was, the guy was wanted, I believe, for like $245. They had a tracker on his car. We knew his location. We ended up going out there. He recognizes, I think, that he's kind of getting tailed, ends up taking off.
Yeah.
And then it was from where it was like North Highlands, ends up terminating out in Davis.
Yeah. And if I remember right, the significance of that, because you're right, it did have a tracker on it. And I think people are going to question, well, if it has a tracker on it, why are you actually pursuing it? But it was something else to do with the kids, where detectives had all this information. They actually sent half of our SWAT team to the house to do security on the house where kids were at. Remember?
Yeah, because he threatened to come back and harm the family.
Yeah. So I was in a car with two other guys on our team, and we were in one of our unmarked take-home cars. And then you were with another officer in a marked car, in case if we had to make the stop.
So yeah, I took the marked car out to initiate the stop of the vehicle. Ends up going pursuit. And backtracking. The tracker was not ours. It was, he had bought the car at one of these places that probably frequently has to repossess them.
Yes.
So they were able to say, hey, look, we'll tell you where it's at. It's right here.
Yeah.
And it was good enough. It was actually live. They're like, he's driving in a circle in a parking lot.
Yep.
And then
that was in the county. That was outside of our city, right? That was in the county.
Yeah, it was up in North Highlands.
Yeah.
Ends up jumping on the freeway, cutting through downtown, actually goes through like some city streets in West Sac, gets back out on the freeway, starts heading out to Davis. But at the termination point, we were the cars.
You're leaving out like vital parts of this.
Go ahead.
You were pursuing it, right? And then
I was in the pursuit. Yes.
What happened? Because you no longer actually chased the car.
No, the Crown Vic couldn't keep up with it because he was driving like a Dodge Magnum, I think.
Yeah, it had like a crazy motor in it.
Yeah, but you guys had the Caprice. I think it has like the LS engine in it.
Yeah.
And you guys were able to keep up with it.
I remember being I was in the back seat of the car, and we were right behind you in a marked car, and we're like, get out of the way. Like we're losing this car. And we ended up passing you.
Is that what you said? Get out of the way?
Well, I wasn't on the radio, but I remember being in the back, and the three of us were like, okay. And then finally made the decision to go around you, and
the Crown Vic's capabilities weren't near the Caprice's capabilities.
Yeah, not at all. That Caprice was pretty high juiced, or I don't even know. It was nuts.
It was more of a performance vehicle than the Crown Vic was. That had probably 200,000 miles on it. So, I remember that driving through like the construction zones and stuff like that. And
there was right off the freeway. Guy took the freeway off ramp, and so did we. And then went through a construction zone, and I remember construction guys like throwing their arms up, just like, what is happening? Because
it was like off the Dukes of Hazzard or something, where like these guys are diving out of the way. And,
looking back, that was probably not the best decision, but given like what he was wanted for, trying to outweigh public safety, like it was one we couldn't terminate. Like we had to catch this person.
Yeah, and he had hit several vehicles trying to get away from us.
Yeah,
I mean, it was probably no less than 5 or 6, but he was moving. Even when he crashed that car, he was still.
Yeah. Well, I remember I remember from the backseat looking at the dash and seeing 158 on our car. I was like, wow, that's. But the person that was driving the car, I wasn't even scared. I was very confident in everyone's capabilities. And just the car itself was pretty performance. But yeah, I think he had to have gone faster. But you're right. He ended up going all the way into the city of Davis, took Richards Boulevard exit, slid off of it.
Takes that off ramp, but then the on ramp for the other side. So it makes that like triangle. He hits it, clears the on ramp road, lands on the other side, and
slides in. And there at the time, it's no longer there. If you live in the city of Davis, it's not there anymore. They trimmed those trees up like crazy, the on-ramp to westbound 80. But the trees like were so big, they touched the ground. And you're right, he flew through that and like slid into the trees.
Yeah, it almost acted like a pillow or something when he crashed he crashed into it, because he ended up getting out and running, but we didn't know that because there was so much debris and dust kicked up.
Yeah.
But we make the hop out, grab our gear, move up to do like an L formation on the vehicle. And this is where tactics and cross training with other agencies or just being familiar with it. And I guess recognizing there's 5 of us moving up, 2 on the back, 3 on the side, that it was probably handled. There was another officer from another agency came running up. We had 2 approaching from the back, 3 approaching from the passenger side of the vehicle. Driver's side of the vehicle was more exposed, and it was facing the freeway.
Yeah.
And as we're approaching, it's dust still kicked up. We look over, and this other officer from another agency had ran over, and now he's pointing the gun. So it's no longer an L formation. It's more of a U, which obviously there's a crossfire situation. So I start, hey, kind of back off. We have this, but it just shows like there's a point in time where now my attention is now directed to this guy, because I don't want this guy getting hurt, but I don't want him shooting one of us either.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure other guys saw him, and they still have, their area of responsibility. But it's just one of those things where, hey, look, you should be able to, okay, they're moving up in an L formation. L formation is nothing crazy. But it's not my place to move up there with him, and okay, there's 5 guys, all in tactical gear. They're probably going to be able to handle the situation. I don't need to run up there and, stand off and point a gun in their general direction.
Yeah. I think that comes with really understanding your role, your responsibility, and then arriving on scene. I try to put myself in that perspective of showing up. I mean, I'm listening to a pursuit. It crashes. It happens in our city. I want to get there. I want to be involved in it. And then I show up trying to do something, but not understanding what anybody else is doing. I think at that point, and you're right, your attention starts diverting from where the threat is to now almost having to tell somebody else what to do. and now your level of threat is like cut in half. I think it's just understanding, maybe not pointing your gun or having it out and seeing what you can do to help.
Yeah. And it's, in that situation, you don't want, or in any situation, you don't want that blue on blue. It's, you're pointing your weapon in a direction where your backdrop is the officers.
Yeah.
And, he listened, he backed off, but, still within those few seconds, and who knows how long he was actually standing there before one of us noticed him.
Right.
But, if that guy had popped out, and, it could have been an uglier situation.
Yeah. And I do remember that, because you're right. We didn't initially see him foot bail, but he did take off. And I almost look back and really think recommendations, if this were to happen again, is if you're that first officer and outside agencies are coming in, depending on your comm center's capabilities, if they can patch channels, which our city had the capability of patching one of our channels to another city's channel. And then when we would talk on our radio channel, it would automatically go to theirs and we could hear the other agencies. But sometimes it takes time for that to actually happen. So I almost, looking back, it would have been beneficial if that officer would have just come up and said, hey, I'm from this department. I can help you. What do you need? I'll radio and extend that information, because I look at that department should be setting up a perimeter for us. It's looking back, obviously. Yeah.
And it's at the same time too, it's, I don't believe we ever asked for help.
No, we didn't.
We were handling the pursuit. We were sticking with it, but it kind of goes back, you're always going to do this coming through your city or your town. And, you always kind of want to keep in mind, in case, just like you said, foot bail, I can start calling a perimeter. But when you have the self-dispatching, and then start getting involved in an active scene, which you don't know, I don't know that this other individual knew the want for this guy. But there was enough people from our department that it was being handled. Maybe there was a place this guy could have assisted on the perimeter or with traffic. But it wasn't in the,
that wasn't the best.
It wasn't in the position that he decided to interject himself in.
And I think at that point, it just goes back to why it's so important to train, or at least send a couple officers to neighboring agencies, work with them, talk with them, pick their brains, figure some stuff out. So if something like that happens, like, you have that communication.
Well, yeah. And it's, and if you're going to self-dispatch to something, then, let somebody know that you're there, not pop up in the middle of, like, the vehicle clear.
Yeah.
It's just
because it was dusty everywhere and you just have someone appear.
Yeah. And you understand this guy's, he's probably amped up too, who, I don't know how close he was to the pursuit, but it's, he wants to get involved. I mean, we all, at the time, everybody wanted to get involved.
Yeah.
It's hard to, like, take that step back and say, I got to slow this down. I can be assistance, I can be of use, but it doesn't necessarily have to be where the fight's taking place.
Right. Because there's a lot of other responsibilities that are just as important.
In recognizing that there could have been things that were done better on that scene. I mean, we were fortunate enough that we all kind of had the same days, same hours. So we'd naturally go back, debrief oftentimes the same day and say, hey, what went well in this? What could we have done better? And I know that we typically wouldn't conclude the debrief until we actually came across something, because there's always something you can do better. So you can't just be like, oh no, it was a complete success just because nobody got injured, guy got taken into custody. There's, especially tactics wise, looking at things, address that stuff. But kind of circling back with the training, it's, in training with neighboring agencies, a lot of times training is based off of budgets. Is this team allotted, a training budget this year? Is, hey, especially in a city, it's all based off, people spending money in that city.
Yeah.
It generates that tax revenue. But the neighboring city might not have that same issue. They might be sending their guys to, hey, they're sending them down to train with LASO or LAPD, and they're going to bring back something that, could be something that you could use. But you don't know that unless you're reaching out to these other agencies and actually have that dialogue between them. We're like, hey, no, we sent 3 guys down there, and this is what we came back with. we should put together on a training day. We should put together a training day and kind of go over some of it. And, you might say, okay, well, that's something similar to what we're doing, but, it's got good points. You're never going to be like, I'm fully adopting this. This is, but there's always that point where you can learn from it, and improve on maybe what you're using. And you say, hey, look, that makes sense to me. I think we're going to start using that. And, we'll try it in training. We'll start working through it, and then we'll take it and we'll, if it's something that we adopt, then we'll go live with it when the time comes.
Well, the budget thing is something I never even would have, I just dawned on me. It did not dawn on me until you actually said it. That makes a lot of sense. And having the ability to send maybe one or two of your teammates or even patrol to different areas to see is huge. You're at least getting some form of training and bringing it back. It's minimal, but you're at least getting something.
And also too, I mean, good training is expensive. I was at a training class one day and the guy said this. He said, good training is expensive, but no training is, hold on, I messed that up. It's training is expensive, but we can't afford not to train.
I like that. Training is expensive, but we can't afford not to train.
And it kind of sticks with me. And even if, you're trying to work around the budget, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to neighboring agencies who may have attended other classes, who might have different tactics, but just you're not putting, 3 or 4 guys to a class that costs $1,500 plus room and board and everything else. You're just training with the guys next door.
Well, here's a couple good tips. We used to do it when we would, at a SWAT capacity, we would clear a house. Everything was done. If there is people inside that were detained, they were removed or whatever the case was. And then our team would come back and then we would walk back through the house and mimic exactly what we did and talk about the flow of how we cleared the house. And then if there was like a mistake or a different option or idea, it was discussed. So we actually cleared the house based off of our skill set and training on what we were actually seeing live, and then go back and re-walk that and talk with everybody. And we used to do that in patrol, where you'd find at the time vacant houses or even new construction homes. So this is another great option, is finding new homes that are being built. They have model homes. Ask to go use the model homes and walk through them, look how you would clear it, get different views on it, bring your patrol team in and do mock clearings and walk through homes, because the model homes have furniture in them.
Yes. It goes back to you're talking about, actually doing the walkthrough live, but, we'd always sketch the house.
Yeah.
Something I hated. I remember you were a great artist.
I was good. Our certification. Okay. So our certification, part of our certification process, which we can't disclose the location for the integrity of the team, but you were tasked with going out with a member that you selected on the team that was senior. And then you would scout and draw the exterior of the location discreetly without being caught. Like the whole point was to do a scout quietly and never be seen. And then you draw it on your note card and then come back on a big whiteboard in the van. And then you presented your plan to the team. And I remember yours. I'm going to dig the picture up because it was awesome. When you did your cert, I remember we were laughing and going, I've never attacked. And,
I don't think I was laughing.
Well, you weren't, but I was, and thinking, this is a pirate ship. I've never seen a pirate ship before. Are we looking at the same location? Remember that? It looked like a boat.
Obviously, I remembered a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and they saved it on the board for a while.
It was there.
I think due to the detail.
The detail. I remember when I certified, when I left, I clipped the wall with the van.
Yeah.
Yeah, and damaged the van.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was so excited. Didn't pay attention. Yeah, there's more stuff that followed on that, but well, let's finish with debriefs. You mentioned debriefs, and I think it's really important that we do finish on debriefs, because we both came from a full-time team. Every operation, team movement that we did, we debriefed. So do you want to talk to us and give us a rundown of how our team debriefs worked and the benefits of that?
Yeah, and the debriefing, I don't think it even has to necessarily stop at tactics. Like, it's any situation that's involving, like, you go back, even in my current role now in my job, we'll do executive protection. Our friend, my boss is mutual acquaintance with Mark, but we'll talk about this stuff and say, hey, look, this is what went well. This is kind of what we could do better. And you don't want to be like, oh, it was great. Everything's a learning experience. And, and a lot of it is, kind of taking that attitude, but it was something that was really reinforced while I was on the SWAT team was we debrief it. We tried not to, a lot of times we would debrief it that day if it was just warrant service or something like that. But usually if we had a call out where we went to an active scene, we would debrief it the next morning. And it's important because it's one of the things where you start looking at stuff. Hey, it's none of the stuff is routine. You're using the tactic, but there's always different floor plans. There's always something that comes up, whether it's, you get stopped at a door, a gate, there's a dog. There's always some sort of element that might be different from something that you just can't, it's not a cookie cutter. So going back, doing that walkthrough, sketching it, and that's why I was very detailed in the drawings.
So this cracks me up because it just brings up another debrief in your sketches where there was times when Patrick would, somebody was assigned to sketch the interior of the home, and Patrick would sketch it. And we were all excited to always see him because he'd go in the debrief room and you'd have to sketch it on a really big whiteboard to the best of you possibly could with windows and doors and the direction of interior doors, the door swing, the side of the hinges. Like you said, it is pretty detailed. That way, everybody marked what their flow was into the house. And I remember multiple times sitting there looking at this picture and they're like, Red, because they called me Red, they're like, where did you go? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I've ever been in this house because it doesn't reflect the house that I was in. And
maybe in my early sketches.
Yeah. And they're like, someone would be like, you're right. That wall wasn't there. And you're like, hold on. Okay, and then we'd all have to pitch it. It was always fun.
To be honest, nobody was good at sketching.
No, nobody was.
I mean, I remember some of yours. It's like when you go to like Disneyland, they do the animation drawing of you where you're like, yeah, that kind of looks like it's but it looks like a sillier version.
Yeah, is that a bedroom or is that a closet the size of that?
But also too, it's that, the detail in the sketch, especially when you got to knock it out on the note card or a small piece of paper. Now, the team is relying on you, although it seems kind of like it's usually a job that's assigned to somebody who's not certified, somebody who's new on the team. They come through, they sketch the house. But the detail that you're putting into that team is relying on the next day when we're actually going to debrief this. And just like you said, you can't switch, hey, moving down the hallway, we're going to take the first door that we come to. Well, if the first door is on the right-hand side of the hallway, you can't put the first door on the left-hand side because it's not accurate. And, so it's getting that stuff right because it might seem kind of like a lame task in the beginning, but that is what the team's going to rely on in that debrief when you guys are talking about things, talking about tactics, what went well and what could have got done better is, everyone might remember things a little bit differently, but the guy who sketched that should remember it accurately.
Yeah, and I remember the first couple debriefs we were in, the senior guys on the team were like, this is what I did. I did this. I should have done this, but I did this. That was a mistake. I messed up here, or this was good, and I made a mistake here. And then the next person behind him would describe, like, I was anticipating you doing this movement, which is our tactic, but you didn't, which caused this chain of effect, which affects the whole movement of the whole house. And I remember making mistakes, and it was really hard to actually say in there with all the guys when we first started debriefs and saying, you know what, I actually made a mistake doing this and I should have done that. It was hard because in law enforcement, you're not taught to openly discuss your mistakes. And, the point of it was not to criticize. It was for everyone to understand what was happening. And then that really actually built a lot of confidence in everybody on the team. They gained confidence in us when we were new on the team, and it gained confidence in the new guys when we were senior on the team, because they could admit and say they made a mistake, even when they could have made a mistake by themselves in a room and no one would know, but they would actually be honest about it.
Yeah, it's a great point because I think it puts you in the spotlight next time too, because we were typically always B cell.
Yeah.
But A cell splits that first room, go off of the team leader. B cell's going to hit that next intersection or hallway that we're headed to. But if you make that mistake and you admit to it, everybody, even the people who weren't right behind you, because the people who were right behind you are going to know this guy made a mistake and he didn't admit to it.
Yeah.
But it kind of, in admitting it in front of everybody, kind of puts you in the spotlight. You admit your mistakes, fall on your sword. But then the next time through, you're like, I've got to get it right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just going to continue to keep making that mistake because you're not being honest with yourself. You're not being honest with your team. But it puts you in that spotlight, and maybe make that same mistake again. And then you kind of keep coming back around to it. And you're like, sometimes repetition is what, everybody makes mistakes. But when you're looking at something, you're looking for habits. Habits are something that continue to happen over and over again. And if you keep making that same mistake over and over again, it's not a mistake, it's a habit at this point. Yeah. So you've got to be able to address that and try to resolve that, because the rest of your team is depending on you to get things right.
That's a good point. Well, dude, I'm really happy that you came in today. Thanks for coming in. I really enjoyed working with you, joking around a whole lot. We have tons of stories we'll have to share on another episode, but this just highlights the importance of full-time SWAT teams working with inner agencies, outer agencies, your neighboring ones, and why patrol and meeting up with other officers is so important. And then finishing up with the debrief, and always debriefing.
Yeah. I appreciate you having me back. It was great. Second time. I didn't get a sweatshirt this time. Were you saving that for the end of the show, or?
Yeah, it is at the end of the show. And this is our second studio that you're in. And the next time you come back, we'll be probably in a bigger studio.
Well, I appreciate you having me back. It's always a good time. And, just kind of, especially talking about it, kind of reinforces, why we were structured the way we were.
Yeah. And why training is so important, and doing things over and over and over and debriefing them go a long ways. All right. Well, thanks for coming in. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Stay smart and be safe.